Turning a two-measure score in 18/4 into a playable arrangement, Mahavishnu Orchestra's Earthship. Introduction. A few days ago, I was watching a video of Mahavishnu Orchestra performing on the BBC in 1972, link below, and it rekindled my interest in their music. I remembered I had this book of John McLaughlin's scores, so I dug it out. As I was flipping through the book, I was struck by the unusual notation on a couple of tracks from their 1975 album, Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Mahavishnu is the name given to John McLaughlin by the Indian spiritual leader Sri Chinmoy. The spiritual quest for understanding, a quest undertaken by many rock and jazz musicians of the late 1960s and early 1970s, is present in all of Mahavishnu Orchestra's music. Mahavishnu Orchestra played a strain of jazz fusion that leaned in the direction of progressive rock, in an era when many of these genre labels began to fall apart. Their music was marked by an overwhelming virtuosity, seamless improvisation, and rhythmic complexity, along with a good dose of mystical spirituality in keeping with the times. Visions of the Emerald Beyond is the penultimate release by the final 70s lineup, comprised of John McLaughlin on 6 and 12-string electric guitars, Jean-Luc Ponty on electric violin, Gail Moran on keyboards and vocals, Ralph Armstrong on bass, and the incredible Narada Michael Walden on drums, who was only 22 when the album was recorded. The core band was supplemented by additional string and horn players, both in the studio and on stage. These are clips from an excellent 53-minute video of this lineup performing in France in 1974, linked in the description below. Let's take a look at the scores that grabbed my attention. The minimal, indeterminate nature of On the Way Home to Earth reminded me of some of the experimental pieces I studied in my clarinet lessons in college. But I had never seen anything quite like Earthship. At first glance, it looks like a regular score for a rather large group of players: voice, flute, guitar, electric violin, electric piano, bass, and drums, plus a small string section consisting of 2 violins and cello. But then I looked closer, and I realized the entire score is only 2 measures, and they're in 18/4. Also, the 2 measures don't just loop. They're played a total of 18 times, but measure A1 is played on cycles 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, and 17, and measure A2 is played on cycles 5, 9, 14, 16, and 18. I don't know if there's any significance to the numbers, or if it's just what sounded good. Parts enter and drop out on various cycles, as noted above each staff, and there are a couple of improvised solos in A Aeolian. Overall, and unlike most Mahavishnu Orchestra tracks, this feels like a piece of music that I might actually be capable of playing, and I appreciate the unique approach John McLaughlin took to putting the score together. In the introduction to the book, he writes, "I have used an unorthodox system in writing these scores, but it has proved to be the simplest and most effective way of explaining flow. The use of miniature score will enable the student to see at a glance what all the instruments are playing simultaneously. It will be particularly useful to read the score while listening to the recordings." I think he's absolutely right about that. These compact scores make it much easier as a listener to follow the structure of the music. But as a performer, I would find the Earthship score nearly impossible to play as it's notated. What time is it? Does anybody really know what time it is? First off, 18/4? I'm not sure the performers really felt the music that way. But if these are to be treated as compound measures, what's the subdivision? Where's the downbeat? Let's start with the drum part. It's just a basic indication of pulse, and not representative of Narada Michael Walden's actual drum performance, which is more layered and nuanced. But this basic drum pattern suggests a 6/8 time signature. The right hand of the electric piano part is written in a way that would also suggest 6/8 or 3/4, playing alternating G major and F major chords in second inversion, each held for 3 measures, notated as 3 tied dotted half notes. But the left hand of the piano and the bass suggest something different and more complicated. The note groupings don't align, but my best guess at something that works for both is 2 bars of 4/4, a bar of 3/8, another bar of 4/4, and a bar of 9/8, subdivided into 2, 3, and 4. Of course, that rhythm requires the keyboardist's two hands to be in different time signatures. I'm sure there are players who can think that way, but I'm not one of them. So what about the lead line, doubled in the guitar and electric violin? That one is maybe easier to figure out by looking at A2 than A1. 4 bars of 4/4 and a bar of 2/4? Sure, why not? Oh, and the voice line looks like it's just in 3/4. Beyond the curiously expansive time signature, there's the matter of the cycles. Counting is an essential part of playing music, but I'm pretty sure that in the thick of performance, I would not be able to keep track of whether I was on cycle 10 or cycle 14. In order to turn this score into something I can perform, I'm going to need to expand it into a more traditional structure. That will start with loading the score in its initial form into MuseScore, and then splitting things up from there. Arranging playable instrument parts. I have no idea what kind of sheet music the players in the band were given when they were learning these pieces. It's possible that what they were given closely matches what's in the book, and it was up to them to make sense of it all. Or it's possible they were given fully written out parts, and the condensed versions were prepared exclusively for the book. Either way, if I'm going to play it myself, it needs to be much more straightforward than this. The first thing I need to figure out is my time signature, or signatures. Fortunately, I think it's simpler than it looks. When I listen to the recording, I do feel all of those polyrhythms, but the strongest pulse for me is just a steady 3/4. That's what I'm going with. Time for a quick music theory aside. The electric piano left hand suggests a more complex modal harmony than the right hand's alternating G major and F major chords, outlining an A power chord, and matching the A Aeolian mode indicated for the improv solos. But what really throws me are the B flats that crop up occasionally in the cello line. They're the only accidentals in the entire song, but since they're under the F chord on the piano, they will sound more consonant than the B naturals you'd expect from the key. The B flat definitely sounds like the right note to my ear, but it suggests that things are more harmonically complex than just A Aeolian throughout. There are also some interesting clashes between the piano left hand and the bass. The piano is simply playing A's and E's, but the bass is meandering all over the place, occasionally creating passing dissonances. There are only ever major seconds or minor sevenths though, so never anything really jarring, just enough to create a somewhat unsettled mood. I also noticed when I was recording the electric piano and bass parts that there are specific combinations of notes that seem to produce subharmonics. I worried that putting it in 3/4 would set up too much of a clear rhythmic structure versus the general fluidity of the original score, but I found that the bass line eliminated most of that concern, along with taking a free improvisatory approach to the percussion, which sometimes carries a 3/4 feel, but I didn't spend too much time thinking about downbeats. I found that the piece seems much simpler when it's written out in conventional notation, but you also lose the sense of the overall structure and patterns inherent in the compact score, which is really best suited for following along as a listener. It's kind of funny that the compact score is such a great listening tool, but also makes the piece much more difficult to perform, whereas a traditional score is just the opposite. But wait, there's more. I realized the next morning that I had forgotten to do a couple of things. First, since I don't have a violin and couldn't play it anyway, I want to move the electric violin part to alto sax. Second, since I am not comfortable reading sheet music on guitar, I want to have tablature. Unfortunately, it's been a while since I've done tabs in MuseScore, and I can't remember how to change the strings it puts the notes on. Time to check the documentation. Aha! It's Command Up-Down, not Shift Up-Down, which changes the actual notes. Okay, on to Logic. Preparing a Logic project from a MuseScore score. When I'm going to record a piece of music for which I've prepared a full arrangement in MuseScore, I like to set up the project in Logic with MIDI guide tracks. It's really easy to do. MuseScore has an export to MIDI option, which is really easy to use, although it has a couple of pitfalls. Most notably, that chord symbols in the chart get realized as full held chord notes in the MIDI files for the corresponding individual parts. I get why this is an option, but it seems silly to be the default. And worse, I can never remember how to turn it off, so I have to keep reviewing the same pages on the MuseScore support forums, where some members of the core team like to express their apparent disdain for the stupidity of their users. By the way, to keep the chords out of the MIDI files, in MuseScore 4, you have to select the chord symbols and then under the Properties tab, uncheck the Play checkbox. Once I have the exported MIDI files, I just have to drag them into Logic, and it will automatically create a new track for each instrument, using a preset software instrument that is a reasonable match for the part as defined in the MIDI file, although I usually prefer to change the defaults to other instruments that I think sound better. Then, when it's time to record, I have something to play along with. I delete the MIDI tracks once I've recorded the corresponding live instrument, and gradually the project transforms from MIDI cheese into, well, whatever I'm able to produce. Speaking of which, let's check it out. But first, full disclosure. Yes, I use the tools at my disposal. As is usually the case, I quantized the hell out of the drums, and those synth string 16th notes. I also selectively applied a bit of quantizing to the electric piano, bass, and guitar. And the flute. But there, I only used quantizing to get the after-the-fact tape delay rhythms to really lock in. I should have had the tape delay effect going when I recorded, but I didn't think about it until later. At least the alto sax is not processed in any way, except for some compression and reverb. Reeds are my first instruments, and it really shows when I'm pressed to deliver in a recording situation. Finally, I'm a terrible singer. I know it, and it's why most of my music is instrumental. So yes, I used some pitch correction on the vocals. We're clearly not talking T-Pain levels of autotune here. I hope that the vocals still sound natural and flawed, just not as flawed as reality. Okay, let's get on with it. Here's my version.